Welcome back to the Darius Gant Show. I'm your host, Darius Gant, as well as founder and CEO of Tesoro AI, where we help companies to build and scale their AI solutions and AI teams. On this podcast, we focus on cutting-edge technology, more specifically, artificial intelligence. By getting up close and personal with these visionary AI founders and executives, we get real-world insights into the problems that AI is solving. Additionally, we get an inside look into just how they're building their business. In this episode, we sit with Jim Shea. Jim is the founder and CEO of DeepSig. DeepSig is using artificial intelligence to radically improve the performance and security of 5G, IoT, and other wireless systems. Jim himself has over 30 years of experience in commercial and industrial defense. He's also a serial entrepreneur. He's come back to the plate with his next startup, DeepSig. So we'll get front row seats into how he started about building multiple businesses and how he found a pain point that can be solved with artificial intelligence. If you or your team is considering building an AI solution, make sure you check out the team here at Tesoro AI. We've assembled the leading experts in data science and machine learning. So whether we're talking about AI strategy, custom software development, staff augmentation, or data labeling, we've got a strong team here that has your back. So head over to www.tesoroai.com. All right, without further ado, let's hop into the show and chat with Jim. All right, Jim, welcome to the show. If I read your background correctly, you have started a company in the past, built it, sold it, and now you're back for the second go round. Or maybe.
Oh yeah, I'm a serial entrepreneur, I guess. If you get to two, serial, I guess.
What's keeping you in the game? Is it something about startups, something about new businesses?
I love startups. I've run large companies of hundreds of people, done some turnarounds, but I just like the enthusiasm and just the acceleration you get in a startup. So it's really what I love doing.
Yeah, really quickly here, and we'll dive into what you guys are working on now. But curious, obviously, a startup, something completely new, a turnaround, something that exists, but a lot of changes need to happen. I guess what's the key difference, the number one difference for you as someone who's been on both sides? Because there's a lot of conversation around one way to approach business is to start something new. The other way is to go buy something and scale that way. So I'm curious what your experience, has been from that perspective.
Well, I like starting from scratch. It is rough the first year or so, but you really get to set the culture. Mm-hmm. And culture is so important for businesses. And by doing a startup, you set that if you've got the right business partners, which I have in this company, that you have a one vision of where you want to go, and you're able to you have no politics. Everybody's pulling the same direction, and it's just really a pleasure to come to work. The turnarounds I've done have been for businesses that are broken and having problems. So that's a different case. That is, you have to change culture very often. The one turnaround I did, they had done good things, but over the past 4 or 5 years, they had really degraded. And really, it was just getting people to visualize where they used to be and how to get back there. And once we did that, we were very successful. In 6 months, we would break it even. Within a year, we're making money. So I think culture and vision is critical for a business of any type.
Yeah. I think having, when I worked in private equity, that was the major difference. I had this idea, you can just scale businesses. You can kind of do whatever you want. Maybe a lot of investors think like that, having not been operators at one point. But when you get into the weeds, yes, there is a culture in place. And if you change the culture and it goes in a bad direction, things are just going to get worse, right? Versus startup, you actually have an opportunity to build things in a way that you see them. Okay, cool. So you are a U of I guy. Is that where you started off from, like a technology background? We know U of I has a long history in tech.
So I did my undergraduate at Georgia Tech. I went there, and then I went to grad school at U of I.
Here we go.
And U of I has really, honed my understanding of the telecommunications area. Also did some work in optics. So I've been involved in communications, both on the optical side and the wireless side. And yeah, U of I was a great place. Georgia Tech was a great place. Just really were able to grow and learn and make a lot of good connections too.
Yeah, so talk about, because DeepSig, your company today, is really focused on this wireless space. Would love to learn a little bit more where you began to hone that expertise in that, particular space, that industry.
Well, actually, I started out, I worked for the US government for a couple of years and then worked for Boeing. I was actually a company that was eventually purchased by Boeing, and that was more on the defense side. Did my first startup in 1990. where we were doing what was called software-defined radio. Now we do everything with software, but in the 90s, everything was analog resistors and capacitors. That's how you built radios. But we were one of the early companies realizing you could go sample those things and do everything digitally. So we did that. We started out doing defense work, but we eventually got into the cable modem area. And we developed a test solution for cable modems. We were able to go deal with all the impairments and understand what was going on. And that product, I sold that company in 2000, but the product is in about 6th generation and it's still being used today. Wow. So if you have a cable modem, it's been tested with equipment that my first company developed.
Interesting. And so at what point, did you see an opportunity to solve the pain point that DeepSig solves now? And what was that pain point?
Wireless technology has been around for 70 or 80 years, very common. And it's been solved with traditional algorithms, and they work quite well, particularly if you don't have a lot of users, if you don't have a lot of interference. But as we're getting more and more usage of wireless, it's becoming pervasive. Signals are interfering with each other. Everyone wants more and more bandwidth. In the past, if you could get any message across, you were happy. But now you want that connectivity. You want it to be there wherever you go, and you always want it to be high speed. And we see that AI is the way to do that. We can sense what's going on in the wireless environment. Is there interference that could be causing problems? Which channel do I pick? AI can speed that process up by up to a factor of 1,000, we've been told by our customers. Wow. Then when you want to actually do the communications, we can actually learn the locality of where you're communicating, what's unique about it, what's the best way to get that information across. And we see that AI is the best way to go solve that problem. So we can reduce the power consumption. The problem with 5G is it's taking more and more power. We all want to be environmentally aware, and we want to use less power, not more power. So AI, since it understands what's going on, can actually implement wireless systems using a lot less power.
Okay, so is the idea there, because we're using wireless a lot more, whether it be the new Apple earbuds, what you're doing with your cell phone, just a number of different use cases. There's a ton of signals that are out there. And so there were traditional algorithms that were used for signal detection. But AI, what the AI is doing is it's allowing you to find the signal that allow you to get a message from point A to point B most quickly.
Yes, and most efficiently. Yes, that's correct. And then very often, we actually have a product that senses the environment. It's called Anomaly Detection, and it tells you what's there. And so the market space for that tends to be interference detection. We're actually applying it to cyber intrusion detection. There's a lot of different areas it can be applied to. Then the companion product is Omni 5 for physical, and actually learns physically the best way to send that message. Now, we can learn entirely new ways of communicating. In fact, we've done that with some experiments with NASA, demonstrating that over the satellite that communicates with the space station. But really, we see the big cases for 5G. And that's where you want to be able to process that signal the most efficient way possible. And instead of using a fixed algorithm, AI can learn what's going on in the environment and develop a way of processing that signal the very best way. And what's nice about for some of these applications, it can actually self-learn because your phone is talking back to the base station, you're saying how well it's doing. So we get large, very big data sets that we can use, which are critical for all of artificial intelligence.
Interesting. So what are some of the companies that get the most use out of this AI-enabled technology?
So we're just starting out. So we work in a lot of verticals, and a lot of them I'm under non-disclosure, so I can't say too much. Sure. But we're working with companies like Intel. They are trying to go to a virtualized 5G. So instead of using custom hardware, such as you would get from a Nokia or an Ericsson or a Huawei, they want to just use plain servers. And we see this throughout the world where you're just trying to virtualize everything, okay? Now, by doing that, though, it gives us an easy market entry because they're using standard Intel processors. So we can literally go in there and offer them an upgrade to their software where we take out a lot of their traditional signal processing and replace it with a deep neural network. So this makes it very easy to upgrade in the field and to do custom variations for people. And so we're finding companies that are working with Intel, it's called ORAN, for Open Radio Access Network. That's a big thing that's really starting to happen in the 5G space. So we're working closely with them. And then we're working with a lot of their partners that are around that work in that space also.
Okay. So would it be that companies who are kind of tech forward would understand the value and would be able to get the most use? Or is this a product that even older tech companies or older companies in general would be able to get some use out of?
So we really provide the way for any company to add artificial intelligence into their product, the wireless. So we try to work with whatever processor hardware they have. The goal is to have it a pure software upgrade. So we're getting a wide range of companies. We're talking to the people that make test equipment. We're talking to a lot of the people that are making your cell phones. Again, I can't go into a lot of details.
Yeah, sure.
The cell phones, the base stations, once they start telling you the details, they want to lock you up. So under NDA, but those are the customer base that we're very active with right now.
Okay. Yeah, I was just really curious, kind of the folks, the landscape or the industries that are getting the most use and would be the first adopters to what you all are building here. Okay, and so I guess what does it look like to actually engage with it? Because you mentioned it's just a simple software update, right? But how would you actually engage with the company? You have a team that goes out there and provides the software update?
Yes, what we do is we work with their engineers. We have to get the access into their code so that we can put our code in there. And then once we're able to do that, we will do a test phase. We'll go through and do some test code to make sure it works properly, that they're getting the improvements they want. Often we'll customize it slightly. And once we do that, we call proof of concept, we then will move into volume production, where we're just basically providing software licenses to them. And typically like on a per device basis or a company-wide basis, we have different software models we use. And then as that product is being produced, they can either install it at the point of production, or it can be an upgrade that they add later on just through a software download process.
Yes, very, very straightforward. So what does it look like then? When we talk about AI, there's always this data component, right? We need to have enough data and quality data to then be able to train the algorithms, right? So startups, a lot of times don't have any data. So then you have to solve that challenge. I'm curious how you all approach this problem or this opportunity with data so that you could build an AI solution.
Well, clearly for an AI company, getting data is one of the key things you have to do, and curating it and labeling it. So for our first product that detects signals, we went through and we did a lot of collection throughout the United States, around the world, of wireless signals. We then have a tool that we actually sell to customers if they want to label their own data. We label the data. You'll say that signal is a Wi-Fi signal, the other signal is an LTE signal. It will learn that information. And then we process it through our neural network training system, and we develop that model. So we've developed a large curated data set, and that's taken a lot of effort. Yeah. But to actually do the labeling, we started out doing it with our own engineers. We're now starting to outsource it as we've been able to simplify it. We are also automating it with some hybrid learning systems where, based upon what we've seen before, we can really multiply the effectiveness of someone labeling, because a lot of times we can give hints of what the data should be. We can, very often we're doing this pictorially. We're looking at the wireless signals in a pictorial version, and we'll be drawing actual boxes around the individual signals. So for signals that are unknown, we can just say unknown, and we can grab together maybe 10 that are almost the same, and we'll say to the human operator, are they the same signal? He can say yes, or he can say yes, and then we know that goes in the database and gets updated. So we go a lot of different ways. Now for the actual 5G system, the beauty of a lot of wireless communication systems is even if it's poor quality, they're continually sending information back saying how good things are. So when that happens, we can go in and we can use that to self-label the data. So we really don't have to do a lot of it because we're getting continuous feedback. We know what we're sending. We know it should be coming back. We get some indications of how well it's working. And by virtue of that, we're able to go ahead and improve things.
Yeah, and so that's for the detection piece.
Exactly, right.
You also mentioned for detection, there was some functionality you had where you can understand intrusions, or correct me if I'm wrong, but intrusions or some type of bad actors. Was that data available for you to collect as well?
Yeah, so part of it is we do what is called anomaly detection.
Okay.
We look for differences, and there's some standard ways of doing that in machine learning. We're developing new ways specifically for the wireless environment.
Yeah.
So what we've been able to do is go in and look for unusual circumstances, and then that is reported to your cyber system. There's systems using Splunk or other, the ELK stack. We work with all these standard products, and we're just another data input to that to say in an environment, hey, something unusual is going on. Maybe you ought to look at your core network to see if there's excess activity because there's all this new wireless stuff happening. So we provide a trigger to look at what's going on in your core network.
Okay, so that's the detection side. Now you got the efficiency side as well. How did that kind of process of development come about?
Well, that came about because we understood that people have been developing new ways of sending signals, and there's always a new way. They patent it, they go on and on. We said, what if we can just automate that so the neural network learns the best way? Instead of finding one way that's optimal for some small use case, we could have something just learn the general case. And we found out with neural networks, we could train them very rapidly to do this and get substantially better performance. Now, engineers and mathematicians have worked out the theoretical basis. If there's no interference and life is perfect, that's a solved problem. But when you're driving around your car, that's never true. There's always problems, with breakdowns in systems. So what we're able to do is learn the optimum waveform or the optimum way to process whatever waveform you're using, be it 5G, 4G, Wi-Fi, whatever. We can actually learn the best way to process that.
Okay. And does that learning happen from? Were you able to collect that in a similar way you were able to collect the data from the detection product?
It's actually a little bit easier because what we do is we start out with the algorithm that's being used today. We set up the network, and we know the data is going back and forth, and then we can put the neural network in that path, and it can learn, did my bits get better or worse as time proceeds? And so we get that feedback because as you go from a picture or voice, you don't need everything to be perfect, right? But we can just make it get better and better. So where you might be getting an intermittent drop call, suddenly we have perfect connectivity with our technology.
Yeah, and I also want to learn from some of the pivots that you all have made in that data strategy, right? So you mentioned starting off with your own engineers, then eventually moving to a model where some things you say, hey, look, we'll just outsource this. What were some of the key learnings you had or some of the key challenges you had which caused you to make some of those changes?
Well, we had some really good customers that were nice beta test sites for us, right? So we took all of our PhDs and they were labeling data, and then we tried to understand the pain points they had in doing that, and we tried to automate those. And I think we've done a good job. And so we're able to then work with other companies' engineers, and then maybe just with their technicians. And over time, it's become easier and easier to do the data labeling. And once we got it down to a simple enough state, we said, hey, look, we can take somebody, and in a matter of an hour or two of training, they can now be labeling this data. And they can't label everything, so we do quality control, but they can label probably 95% of it. So that radically reduces the cost of this labeling effort.
Yeah, that's a good point, because I'm thinking if you've got PhDs who are, number one, they probably don't want to be doing.
No, they get very bored quickly doing this. Yeah.
and the same with engineers, right? So if you can get folks who, you've established a process that you have your points in such an order to where someone who is not a PhD, not an engineer, can go in and tackle those things, whereas you can put those folks on higher level tasks, things that are more meaningful to them.
Correct. Yes, absolutely.
And how do you then think about the people that you bring on to the team? Maybe we can just take a step back to the early days before you had the product build. Did you start by yourself? Did you bring on a co-founder? And then a lot of this stuff is complicated to build. So I'm curious, what were the key pieces that you said, I need to put this in place so that we can get to the next level?
So I'm the business guy. I have an engineering background, but I only threaten to do engineering. My co-founder, to make things simple for you, Jim Shea, my co-founder is Dr. Tim O'Shea. So the names are very similar. We're not really related, but Tim's really the guy who developed the core IP for what we do at DeepSig. He was a research scientist at Virginia Tech and saw it about 2014. Deep learning was just radically changing the way AI worked. It went with image recognition, we went from maybe 85% accuracy to, when they went to deep learning, we're now at 99% accuracy. And Tim realized very early on he could apply that same technology to the wireless field. So he began doing that. Actually, the director of his organization, Dr. Charles Clancy, who I've known for many years, introduced me to Tim. Okay. I had finished doing a turnaround. It was a big company, great company. But my deal was kind of over. I'd done it for 5 or 6 years, and I was ready to do a startup. So Charles introduced me to Tim, and we got the company going. We incorporated it in 2016, got it going in about March of 2017. And then it was great because I had some business people we were able to bring in. Tim had just a wide raft of technical people he knew. So we're able to really hire up pretty quickly for the core staff. We did mostly technical people to get the basic product working. Now we've been building it out with the office functions, business development, sales, all those things you need to really make your company a success.
Okay. And as you started adding on that business function, I imagine that's because, look, the product was in a place where you're saying, hey, we're at least at a point where we can do some POCs. What was it like going to market from 0 customers to getting those first 2 or 3?
It actually was not that difficult because there's a great enthusiasm for all things AI.
Okay.
We actually say we're more machine learning because we're not replicating what a human does most of the time. The machine is learning things. But there's a great thirst for incorporating AI. And most of the people that were in our space you pay them a bunch of money, they do a study for you, they might get you some really clunky prototype code. We showed up with a product that works. Now, the product has gotten better over time, certainly, but the customers could go and do useful work with it out of the box. And we're still one of the first companies that are doing that in the wireless space. In fact, we received an AI award, and we're only one of 2 companies that they listed in AI in the top 100. They're actually doing anything in the wireless space at all. So it's still a fairly rarefied space. You get a lot of the major companies that are doing work in the wireless field, but they're keeping that all in-house. Yeah. So we're a place that a company that wants to get into AI rapidly in the wireless space can come to us, and we have products that we can rapidly roll out. And we view ourselves as a software components company. We can provide those components that can integrate into their overall products.
Yeah, so ease of use and effectiveness was really helpful for you all. Where, I guess if you think about that first customer, that second customer, and the reason I'm asking is because a lot of, as a startup, right, you don't have any basis to go from unless you're able to leverage some relationships, or some folks have to go the cold calling route. Some folks have to go the surveying route. I'm curious what that initial path to get you off the ground, even to get that first POC together look like.
So it was a mix of knowing people, relationships. That's been very critical. I've been in the industry a long time. We have business development people who've been in it a long time. We have received some US government funding. There's the SBIR program, the Small Business Innovative Research Grant, that we received some funding through. That opened the doors to yet other customers. There were field trials that were staged by various companies. There's a lot of these competitions. We participated in some of those. That gave us a lot of notoriety and allowed us then to acquire customers fairly quickly.
Okay, yeah, because before you have that reputation, right, that you can lean on, and those case studies that you can lean on to do some marketing and push from a sales perspective, there has to be something that gets you off the ground. So yeah, I was curious about that. One thing I would love to know, right, if you can think about your experience with building the technology itself, what is one thing that you wish you would have known from day one?
In a startup, a lot of things you don't want to know from day one.
That's a good point, because in a lot of situations I say, if I would have known what I know now, I may not have done it.
That's right, exactly right. Now, having done startups before, a startup, you need to have a technology basis. If you're doing a technology company, you need to have the management skills, but it's also a leap of faith. Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to say what we would have done differently. I mean,
not necessarily done differently, because a lot of the things you had to make those, especially we're talking about cutting edge technology, right? So a lot of the things it was inevitable that you were going to run into that issue.
That's right.
But if we're thinking about from the perspective of, hey, look, we're building cutting edge technology. This is AI that a lot of folks have never implemented before. Maybe one thing, if you could go back and advise yourself in 2016 and say, hey, look, this is one thing that you're going to encounter related to building the technology, the AI, that, will help you to get up to speed more quickly, if I gave you this advice.
Yeah, no, I think, as we talked about earlier, we knew data was important, but it's even more important than we ever envisioned for AI. You have to go understand that flow, how you're going to get your data, how you're going to label it. And you probably, really need to get out front even earlier. We were looking at the basic algorithms, but once you had the algorithms, then we had this additional delay of really getting data labeled properly and curating and handling volumes of data. And we know companies now are getting in the market space doing just that function. And I think that's a good place to be because it's a universal requirement for AI type systems.
Yeah, I think a lot of folks it's easy to get mesmerized by the power of certain applications of AI because you're able to do things that humans can't do. Static code is not going to be able to do. But then there's kind of like, hey, there's this other piece that you need to be thinking about because you're not going to just plug it into a wall and hey, everything's going to work perfectly.
Yeah, and the thing with customers too, they have to understand, is that AI gets better over time. Ordinarily, when you do an algorithm, now you might change the algorithm, but the basic algorithm, once it's done, it's done. It does what it does. But you have to say to customers, well, if you keep adding more and more data to your data set, it's going to have higher recognition performance. It's going to be better. And when you're starting out, you can't afford to get all the data you'd like to get. So you have to sell that to the customers. And fortunately, we've had some very loyal customers that have worked with us to get us as we've been able to improve those data sets. Some of them have provided data. I mean, it's been a good interaction.
Now, in the cases where they provided data, because in my experience, right, a lot of folks have data,
right?
But then there's data that you can actually use.
Right.
So in work, did you run into that at all with
yeah, absolutely. So we have certain customers that they have data sets. And I don't think there's legal reasons why they couldn't provide it to us, but they won't because their lawyers are concerned. So you have to keep it within their enclave. So you really can't help you with your general product. And others companies are more open to that, but you have to make sure at the beginning you establish data rights when you start doing labeling exercises. I mean, are they totally funding it? Do they own the data? Is it a joint venture where you both get access to it? All these things need to be worked out as you generate customer relationships.
Okay. Is that something that you think, in your experience, is best to present beforehand? And here's how we think the process should go? Or do you let that piece fall after they commit to giving you the data?
Well, most companies of any sophistication, you have to talk about that ahead of time.
Yeah.
And come to agreement on it. So yeah, and the key thing is, and you want to try to present to the customer ahead of time how you're able to make sure this data they're providing is it doesn't contain personally identifiable information. And if you can give them a good feeling about that, that simplifies it a lot. If there is PII, then it's almost impossible to get data these days in the US and Europe.
Yeah. So given where you all are now, I mean, and it's still in the early phases, I'm curious, what are some of the things, if we look into the future, right? Given some of the things, some of the efficiencies you're able to create in both detection and efficiency of this wireless ecosystem, what are some of the things that you envision being able to happen because of this technology?
So the most important thing for us, I think, moving forward is rolling into 5G and really getting a 5G customer online. So where we are now is we have a prototype base station. We have an experimental FCC license, and we're on the cusp of making 5G calls with our technology. So once we do that, we're working with Intel and other partners, and the goal there is to then rapidly scale in the future. So that's where we're trying to go as a customer. So we have to prove ourselves that we have a product worthy of use and to our partners, and then we believe we have a very solid value proposition because we save our customer both CapEx and OpEx. So by doing that, we think it can roll out very quickly. But we're currently working with this virtualized wireless 5G environment, which is just beginning. It's maybe 1 or 2% of the market right now. The major folks control most of it. So we're trying to be involved with that, come to market at the right time, not too early, not too late. Establish our reputation. All those things you need to do to scale rapidly is what's going to happen over the next year to 2 years for us on the 5G space. On the sensing space, we see a big role there for 5G of all sorts because there's a big interest in private networks. For those private networks, you need to make sure that you assure quality. And we think that in inadvertent wireless interference, intrusion attempts, all those type of things are going to be important to be able to detect. And we think our Omni SIG product will be a key way of enabling our customer base to detect those issues.
Yeah, and if I'm thinking about crystallizing this, maybe for someone who's unfamiliar, and maybe you can shed some more light into this because I'm literally taking a guess, but in a scenario where you got IoT or you got even autonomous driving where there could be signal interference. There also could be folks trying to break into a car, right? Being able to detect some of those signals from what you all are doing in anomaly detection, right? Could be a way that crystallizing what the technology is actually enabling in the market.
That's correct. Yes, and that's exactly what we want to enable people to do, is to understand. You have a robot in an industrial facility. It's moving heavy objects around. But the great thing about 5G is it can be highly reliable. You want to make sure there's nothing in the environment that could cause a problem or interrupt that process. And much like self-driving cars, as we move to fully autonomous self-driving cars, you want to assure if there is interference in a band, it can go look for a place where there's not interference to communicate, to make sure you keep those links up at all costs. And we believe our technology provides those eyes and ears to let you know what's going on in the environment, to make those changes or adaptations as necessary.
Yeah, one thing that was kind of rolling around in my head is obviously I don't know if there's fewer signals when you move into rural areas or if the signals are just less powerful. Do you improve access to signals or the efficiency in rural areas as well, or is that just dependent upon how things are set up on the customer side?
So we believe, like our solution for 5G will enable you to have larger cell sites, spaced out further, okay? Or if you keep the cells at the same location, you get higher quality. So you won't get the dropouts as commonplace as you do now in rural areas. Also, by sensing what's going on in the environment, we've got a long way to go, but eventually we will be able to have it's called dynamic spectrum allocation, where you jump around in frequency to find the best channel to use at any one time. We think that's going to become more commonplace. And again, we think our technology can help that. But yeah, when you get into city, it can be a very dense environment. You see this 5G, the millimeter wave that Verizon and other folks have that get you very high data rates.
Yeah.
We don't think you're going to see as much of that in the rural areas because those cells are very small. So it's going to be important to use what you have out there as efficiently as possible to give the best user experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting. It actually reminded me in Chicago, I don't know if you remember the streets well, but there's Lower Wacker. If you go down Lower Wacker and you had a GPS, you will quickly find that thing is spinning around. And
you're in a hole.
Exactly. So if you guys can help solve that problem, there will be a lot of excited Chicagoans.
Yeah, we can't. There's certain physical limitations no matter what you do, but we just make sure you do as well as you do. And very often, if you lose coverage, it could be because of interference too, or the adjacent cell sites aren't well matched. We can solve those problems with AI. And I think it's going to give an overall better user experience.
Okay, so let's kind of change gears here and talk about fundraising. So you all recently raised a Series A.
We did. Yeah.
Can you talk about your early experience? You mentioned SBIR, you mentioned government funding. Can you talk about when the right time was for you guys to do that? And then we'll talk about the Series A.
Sure. Well, we did a seed round first. We raised about $1.5 million on a seed round. And that was, we actually got people in the industry. We tried to avoid the friends and family because we had people, we had one venture capitalist came in and led it. And it was just what's called a convertible note. We didn't actually sell stock. That got us going. We did the normal work without salaries for a while, that kind of fun stuff. And then we received some initial contracts. We got an SBIR, I think with the US Navy, to do some demonstrations. So that helped us on the defense side, which gave us some notoriety. And then we got to the point where we were generating some initial revenue. We had this was for the Omni SIG product, not the Omni 5 product, the sensing product. But we knew that without raising more money, it was going to be a long road and the world was going to pass us by. Right. So at that point, we decided we had enough traction. And then we went on the road show, and raising money is a pain in the neck for anyone. We were going, AI was a buzzword, but everybody was 5G, That was like a foreign concept. We closed our Series A in February last year. It's been just exactly a year, actually yesterday. So
Congrats.
there people were very skeptical because they didn't know how to value 5G or wireless. They were thinking image processing, sentiment analysis, all the things that people do with AI. So it was a tough sell, but we were persuasive, and we actually had some VCs from the seed round that were very helpful. And it was great because we were able to find a lead, Leeward Ventures, that actually was our board member from that company is a former Verizon division president. Okay. So that was, again, we're always looking for smart money because we don't want just money, but we want investors who bring value. I mean, it's great because I got a board meeting tomorrow. I'm going to assign my investors a lot of activities to do. So like free labor. But no, it's a good give and take because then the investor understands what you're doing because you have to communicate to them what you need. And it's a really good relationship. And I've heard of people who've had bad investor experiences. Ours have been extremely positive. They have actually opened a lot of doors for us, and it's been a very gratifying experience.
Yeah, it sounds like though a lot of that is due to the fact that kind of from an early stage, you all sought out or were connected to or connected with investors who understand what it is you're trying to do and can kind of see, all right, I can envision what you all are talking about versus there's this disconnect and you're running through some market study. There's some real industry knowledge on the side of the folks who ultimately did it.
Yeah, and what we did is we went to trade shows to pitch events that were targeted to the telecommunications space. And that was the way we got our name out there. So we did a lot of early groundwork knowing that we'd be raising the Series A. And it's nice when an investor sees you the second or third time, not for the first time, because they'll say, oh, I remember you guys. I mean, even a 15-minute conversation early on, I did these pitch days. You got 90 seconds or 5 minutes, whatever variety of things to pitch. And afterwards, people come up to you and you kept in contact with them. And what I do an investor newsletter every other month or so. And I kept people informed of the ups and downs. And they saw that whenever we got to obstacles, we were able to surmount those obstacles. And I think that generated a lot of confidence in the team that we've built up at DeepSig.
Okay, nice that you all were able to close things out and in February. You got some runway there to scale up. I know we're coming up on time here, but a couple quick fire questions for you.
Sure.
One question is favorite tool to use within the organization and why?
Favorite tech tool? That's a tough one. Probably Slack. We use Slack all the time. Okay. That's our big communication. Helps us communicate rapidly and get ideas across, and we use it for everything.
Okay. All right. That's a popular one for good reason. One person who inspires you either in AI or in business in general.
Wow. I guess Elon Musk. I got a lot of respect for that guy. He actually builds stuff. And I feel like he's doing a lot of good things with technology. And he's providing employment for people. He's actually physically building things and selling product.
Yeah, I can concur with that one. It's interesting how he can lay out something that seems preposterous and then 10 years later, you're like, oh, okay, he actually.
I know the first time I saw those rockets land, I was astounded for SpaceX. So I remember seeing science fiction stuff like that when I was a little kid,
Yeah, exactly. Okay, well, Jim, this was super helpful. I appreciate you allowing us to go into some depth into how you've built what you've built over there at DeepSig. Definitely an interesting use case and one that has a lot of value here. So I appreciate you taking out some time to share with us.
Great. It's been great chatting with you, Darius. Thanks so much.
All right.